In this chapter, we're going to talk about corruption trends in the extractive sector. The extractive sector is famously prone to corruption. Resource-rich countries, on average, score far worse than their non-resource-rich peers on measures of corruption. Last year, a full 30% of the known bribery cases under investigation by the US government were in the oil or mining sector. In a recent report, the OECD examined 427 bribery cases, and 19% took place in the extractive sector, the largest share from any industry. And from Brazil to Nigeria, extractive sector corruption cases have made headlines and changed the course of entire nations. We at NRGI have examined nearly 100 case studies to better understand how extractive sector corruption actually works. Today, I'll share a few of the trends that we observed, addressing where corruption is seen along the decision chain, the forms that corruption takes, and some possible remedies. I also recommend that you look at a publication of ours called 12 Red Flags: Corruption Risks in the Award of Extractive Sector Licenses and Contracts. It tackles this subject in more detail. Corruption occurs all across the extractive sector decision chain. Some areas, however, appear to be particularly susceptible. The allocation of valuable licenses and contracts has attracted corruption in many countries, as companies seek to win favor with government officials, or officials try to steer lucrative deals towards their political allies. This includes the award of exploration and production licenses, but it doesn't stop there. Many corruption cases occur in subcontracting, where oil and mining companies procure the goods and services they need to operate the oil field or the mine. One big example is the car wash scandal from Brazil. The Brazilian National Oil Company awarded inflated construction contracts to a few selected construction companies. These companies then skimmed off some of the funds, laundered the money, and used it to pay off various political bigwigs and National Oil Company executives. Police stumbled on the case when investigating some money laundering through an actual car wash, hence the scandal's name. Along with subcontracting like that, oil trading is another place where political elites often go to siphon off money from the sector. State-owned companies can become hotbeds for corruption because they handle highly valuable transactions, they're easily politicized, and they sit outside of many of the government's formal oversight systems. The national oil companies in Brazil, Nigeria, Angola, Algeria, Congo-Brazzaville, and many other countries have all struggled with corruption. Elsewhere in the decision chain, corruption in regulation also appears often and is difficult to detect. For example, in Kentucky, in the United States, a mining executive bribed a government inspector not to enforce certain environmental regulations that his companies had violated. Many resource-rich countries also experience high levels of corruption in how the governments spend their oil and mining revenues. For instance, a number of investigations have found that well-connected Russian businesses won inflated construction contracts in the run-up to the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics, overspending that the government could easily afford given that oil prices topped $100 per barrel at the time. Along with these observations about where corruption is on the decision chain, we also noticed some trends about common types of corruption. Bribery is one common form, as businesses seek preferential access to lucrative oil and mining business opportunities. Sometimes bribery can take a very basic form. In 2010, a Canadian company called Griffiths paid around $2 million in bribes, plus some shares in the company, to a government official from Chad as part of their quest to secure rights to several oil blocks in Chad. Griffiths transferred the funds to a company set up in the name of the government official's wife. The bribery was discovered, and Griffiths had to pay a $10 million fine to the Canadian government. But the company went on to sell their oil blocks in Chad for $1.2 billion a few years later, so the bribe still certainly paid off. More often, bribery occurs through fixers and middlemen, which makes it more complicated to uncover. There are many problematic cases of companies employing fixers to engage in suspicious behavior. Here's just one. Gunvor is a major oil trading company based in Switzerland. Around 2010, Gunvor wanted to increase its business in Africa. so it hired a few individuals who were closely connected to the president of Congo-Brazzaville. Gunvor paid these individuals $30 million to open doors and provide access to top officials. Soon after, the company received big new oil trading deals in Congo. Now, we don't know whether the $30 million eventually ended up in the pockets of Congolese government officials, but the Swiss government has opened an investigation into this matter. Many other cases of corruption stem from the efforts of government officials to participate in and profit from the extractive sector. In Angola, a number of recent investigations reveal how government officials and political elites control companies that are active in the oil sector. International companies then do business with these politically connected entities and sometimes get in trouble for it. One NGO report uncovered how the Swiss oil trader Trafigura held extensive joint business interests with a top Angolan official. In another case, the Angolan government directed an American oil company called Cobalt to partner with a few unknown local companies, one of which turned out to be owned by several sitting government officials. Angola's far from alone here. In Azerbaijan, investigative journalists uncovered that the government awarded a large gold mining license to a consortium that included a company owned by the president's daughters. These cases, and many others, demonstrate the importance of beneficial ownership disclosure, which reveals who really owns the companies that participate in the extractive sector. This kind of disclosure is spreading in the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, the European Union, and other venues. Beneficial ownership disclosure can help the public know whether politicians and their associates are participating in the sector in ways that create damaging conflicts of interest. But beneficial ownership disclosure won't help in all cases. Our research revealed many cases where political elites use proxies so that they don't have to formally touch either the business or the money that it makes. In such cases, the political leader often decides which company should get a lucrative deal, and then they can tell that company and its bosses how to use their money when it's needed. This is much safer for the public official than actually owning the company themselves. In Nigeria, for example, the former petroleum minister, Dizani Alison Madueke, awarded several huge oil deals to companies headed by her loyal henchmen. These individuals went on to make billions of dollars, some of which they would then use to help the minister out, buying her expensive properties and furniture, and doing her political dirty work as well. We see similar trends in the Democratic Republic of Congo and in several post-Soviet countries where politically loyal executives win big from the extractive sector thanks to their closeness to the president. In many countries, this kind of behavior is perfectly legal, and this speaks to another trend that we observed. Extractive sector corruption takes both legal and illegal forms. Especially in kleptocracies, where corruption takes on truly systemic proportions, the political elites can manipulate the oil sector without fearing any repercussions from law enforcement. After all, they're the ones who write the rules of the game, so they don't have to worry about breaking them. We also observed that none of the major corruption cases we examined would have been possible without the help of various international enablers. There are several categories of enablers. International oil and mining companies often sit at the margins of corrupt deals, making the sector work despite its criminal components. Lawyers and accountants help corrupt actors to structure their deals and launder their funds. The Panama Papers leak revealed the extensive global network of shell companies and bank accounts that corrupt actors can use to launder their ill-gotten wealth. These are often based in jurisdictions which deliberately make it easy to set up companies in secret, including places like the Cayman Islands or some US states like Delaware and Nevada. Once the illicit funds enter these offshore shell companies, it is much easier to then use them to acquire other assets, like real estate in safe, desirable locations like New York and London. As a result of all these international enablers, tackling corruption in resource-rich countries requires action by many countries around the world. But all is not doom and gloom. Examining all these cases also shows us what works, and that impunity does have its limits. In some ways, every corruption case that we know about is an example of success. Somehow the case was discovered, and the perpetrators faced some consequences. They didn't get away with it. In Nigeria, the previous government did perpetrate all kinds of large-scale oil sector corruption, but in 2015 they were voted out of office, in large part because they were known to be corrupt. In Brazil, the police and the judicial system have investigated and prosecuted some of the country's most powerful politicians and business executives who were involved in that huge car wash scheme. In such cases, domestic checks and balances actually worked and reined in corruption. Other cases show the crucial role of foreign bribery prosecution. The US has had a lot of success here, pursuing many large extractive sector cases under its Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, or FCPA. For example, in 2016, a huge hedge fund called OCZIF was caught by US authorities for bribery in the DRC, Niger, and Libya, and the hedge fund had to pay a $400 million fine. Some of the other cases we look at highlight the really powerful work of journalists and civil society activists in bringing corruption to light and not letting it be ignored. To conclude, extractive sector corruption will continue to pose major corruption risks. There's just too much money to be made. However, we know what tools are needed to tackle this challenge. They just need to be deployed in a much more urgent and comprehensive manner. Thanks a lot for your time.